And welcome back to Wall Tactics. We're here to talk about, are orcs struggling in the Pariah Nexus? Let's talk about it. So, before I get deep in today's list, I just want to start the video off with a few points that I hear of contention and kind of try to bring some harmony to the orc community and what our mutual understandings, agreements, and disagreements are. I think most of us are on the same page, but I still think it's good to address this because orc players are kind of all over the place right now with how they feel about this. Some people are drastically impacted by the nerfs, and they're pretty down on orcs. And other people are saying we're just fine. You just got to learn how to play the game. Obviously, the truth falls somewhere in between. So what I will say is, one, most of us can agree that the nerfs were a bit too harsh in maybe Green Tide. Bully Boys only needed one nerf. Everybody agrees on that. But another thing that people need to try to understand for the first side of the argument I'm going to make is people don't really want to go back to playing Index. And in some ways, the majority of ways, the Index is a weaker or at least less interesting version of what it was. We lost some of everybody's favorite tools, such as Squig bombs being so efficient. I mean, Squig, like big units of Squigs being so efficient. Mazrog and how he was very fun data sheet. There's other units that are very similar, like Luminar Caesarus. So it's not like he was drastically OP and because he was double nerfed offensively and defensively. The War Boss nerf, obviously our War Boss is getting out of trucks, is a bit more contentious and weaker now. So people don't look forward to also playing something they've been consistently playing nonstop. Now, for the other side of the argument as to War Horde being an excellent detachment, you are very much right. And I think that's a good point to be made, is that for the last several editions, orcs playing literally what is considered War Horde as sustained one has been good since 8th edition. And orcs just goes with orcs. Orcs are all about volume in every way of the game. We're not quality, we are quantity. Therefore, War Horde is always a great detachment or set of rules to fall back on. We have excellent stratagems, and it just feels good with the GW current terrain as well, as playing melee is quite powerful, and orcs can take advantage of that if you're a well-seasoned player. Now, to bring it back to the other side of people to try to bring harmony to our understanding here is there is a learning curve to that. If you're a newer orc player and you're trying to play these detachments and you build towards them and you're told go back to War Horde, which is now requiring a lot of finesse and understanding of staging and such, you're going to be greatly impacted. Not to mention that you have the second learning curve of Pariah Nexus itself. And last but not least, the meta as a whole has changed, and some people would say it's more potent, more well-developed, as there's more different detachments that can actually counter orcs, or drastically different predatory armies that can really beat us up if you skew too much into one direction of how orcs play. So say you're playing Dread Mob, you actually hate all the anti-tank, you're having a hard time. If you're playing something like Cult of Speed, then you can't deal with anything tough. So there's reasons for why people are coming across in all these directions. One thing I want to say is everybody should just be happy that the meta chasers are gone and that we can kind of get back to feeling our index out as a whole. And the reason we cover these lists is to give people perspective, motivation, encouragement, and kind of food for thought. It's not that you should copy them or feel like you were restricted to these ways of play, but it's what seasoned players are kind of leaning towards, and it helps us all kind of expand our ways of thinking. So let's not be down about orcs. Of course, this weekend was very, very odd of a very small amount of players, as we'll go over in a little bit. It was a very small pool, and last week's did show bad results for orcs as well. Yet it's really new into the Nexus, so let's just take this all as food for thought and move forward with open minds and not really be too harsh on people who are upset about nerfs, or not be too harsh on people who are too complacent or happy with the status of orcs right now. I think the truth is somewhere in between. You should be a little annoyed that they were over nerfed. Let GW become aware of that in some ways in a healthy manner. And I also think that you should not take the game to the top level of play of the top 1 to 5% of players that are trying to run through GTs regularly and take them as the baseline for what you should be trying to replicate, right? It's somewhere in the gray zone where RTTs and people casual gameplays are getting the most games in. And in that case, orcs are totally fine, because our style of gameplay of just smashing people, covering the board with board control is just baseline good for 40K, and some people just can't match that with their certain detachments and factions, other factions that we face, right? So let's just all be happy that orcs are still beloved army. We have we have detachments that are flavorful. We have overall solid data sheets and fun stratagems. And yes, our peak potential, as in if you take two most superior 1% players and you give one the strongest army that there is out, and then you take them orcs are more likely going to lose that matchup out of 10 times. But that's not you or me or even some of the other people. We could just play wherever we're playing and still have great success. So that's why we're going to go into these lists today. Let's get food for thought into this. Let's have a fun time wherever it is. And if we continue to perform poorly, just know that GW has gone back and addressed armies that are underperforming. So don't even be mad about it. You might see your Feel No Pain one day or your 30-point Mega Knobs a day. You might see 130-point Squigpocalypse Boyz. There's so many things that can come into play that can just change things overnight. Therefore, continue to paint, continue to practice what you want to play in the detachments you want to play, because this is all just the beginning of the season, right? And so I just wanted to say that before we get into everything, so everybody can just be cheery up and happy, because the main thing is we like to get stuck in. And of course, before we get stuck in, I'd like to give a word to our sponsor, Baron of Dice, as Baron of Dice has plugged Orks as a whole and the wall tactics so that we can actually have our paint competition. And that really helps us a lot for giving out prizes and doing all the things we want to do. They've actually been the only company that have actually given us a chance to have our own dice be premiered in that way. And therefore, we take great, how do you say, happiness in that, and it makes us feel good. So check out Baron of Dice. These Wall Revolution dice are fantastic, and I've been using them consistently. So with that being said, let's take a look at the stats and the facts. So like I said before, is that we only had 10 players. Keep that in mind as we look at everything, because context matters, right? With that being said, 2 of those players did end up going either one went. Both went 4-1. So we're going to cover both of those lists, and then at the end, I'm going to give us a little cherry on top for a fun list at the end that I want to cover. Yes, Warhorde 39%, Bully Boys 33%, and Dread Mob is 31%. Dread Mob is always going to be odd because one of the lists we're going over today actually is a Dread Mob list to win 4-1, right? But the win percent is so low because the other 2 players pretty much didn't win any of their games, right? And the reason that is because Dread Mob's the easiest detachment to kind of meme with, right? You just kind of go out there and you're running your stomp and your gork and your mork, and you don't really care sometimes, and you're running max kilocans. So this is always going to be a funky number. So let's always keep that in mind when we look at Dread Mob. The one thing I want to point out is there is no Cult of Speed that we're looking at right here. So that's something that people have always brought up. Cult of Speed is going to look good. Cult of Speed is going to look strong. We have one person ATC taking them, but yet other than that, we have struggled to even see one Cult of Speed list go beyond 3 and 2. So I know it's all good for Theory Hammer, but I think they need a lot of help. And I think Da Hunt, in a weird way, needs help with his detachment rule, even though it's quite good into the meta when you end up facing a lot of tanks and tough models. But as you can see through all of these percentages, all the player bases were low, so the win rates were all kind of falling down to weird stages, like Templars at like 41, Dark Angels at 41, Tyranids at 42. It's like you can see that everybody's in a weird spot. Something like Dark Eldar at 70% or something silly. So yes, these numbers are reflective. We're just taking them in for the food for thought. When we go forward, looking at the rest of the season, and every week we cover this, that's why we get the big picture, right? It just shows that we just very much struggle the most. Our player base has fallen off the most. I still think we're better than Gene Stealers. For anybody out there wondering, Gene Stealers are really much just hoping that they roll their units to come back. Other than that, they're not really in the game sometimes, right? So that being said, let's go over the list that I wanted to talk about today. One of the ones I want to go over. This was a under the radar event because it was very, very small. As for it was only like 18 players, which is really much an RTT size event. I mean, some RTTs that some of us attend is 28 players or so. So the 4 rounds is what's important here. But what I really wanted to do is just look at how awesome it was to see a Dread Mob list. So we have a beautiful Dread Mob list that's up in the air, right? So we have a Big Mac. Yes, the Big Mac has made another appearance. Guys are starting to figure him out. We have, with the custom Mega Blaster, we have a Big Mac with Shock Attack Gun with Get Finder Goggles. I think at least one of the Shock Attack Guns with Get Finder Goggles is at this point an auto take for your Dread Mob. You don't need to spam them, but you just need one at least. Then you have 2 mechs, and you'll see why. 4 minimum sized units of Gretchen. I think they're very useful to have them if as the reactive move. And when you look at the rest of the list, how they'll come into play is not only screening your backfield, but screening and reactive moving in the way of some of these big stompy things. Then you have only 1 dedicated transport, followed by what I like to call the Nuke Death Dread, where he just pretty much shows up on the table with 4 custom Mega Blasters and jumps out from the side of the table, utterly destroys something or takes huge damage on it, and then blows himself up from hazardous tests. So he's like I call the nuke, still very fun, and he's actually quite useful. He's not like necessarily just a meme. We have a Gorkanaut and a Morkanaut. Yes, the very thematic list of a Gorkanaut and a Morkanaut made their appearance, but they also got stuck in with a max unit of killicans and 2 3-man units of killicans, followed by the one, the only unit of knobs. But the twist here is the unit of knobs has big choppas. Yes, boys, we have finally made it to the big choppas. The reason I think that is Dread Mob seem to suffer with large amounts of units, right? If there's 20-man units and certain 10-man units, they might struggle to just straight clean up that unit. And you don't really need to pay for the war mods for the power claws because everybody else is trying to do that high octane damage that way anyway. So instead, you want to give the knobs the big choppa, the big mech, so you can run through screens. Let's see if someone's trying to screen your Morkanaut or your Gorkanaut from getting stuck in. Your knobs can essentially get out and run through that screen and hit the backline unit that was back there. And of course, they get to take advantage of push the button, right? So you can still take sustain. You can still get lethal on that if you have to punch something a little tougher than you want, or risk it all and go for the additional AP, which never do that. So, well, not never, but you know what I'm saying. So this is very much different. I actually really like to see this. How you see this list playing out is, you know, you have your truck so you can stage and set up where you need your knobs on the battlefield with the big mech. Each Titanic model will get their mech. In some ways, they can actually stand within buildings and score secondaries for you while they're actually enjoying their loan up and standing behind their big stompy Titanic model. How these guys work is that they can actually stage behind some of these new terrain setups in a safe manner from getting shot off the table too reliably, and then peek up over and shoot at someone, or really make their way around the terrain with their auto. You know, they can actually advance and charge. Advance and shoot with the strat, and with that strat, it allows them to re-roll their advances, so it naturally stacks with on the wall turn. You're going to advance and shoot one of these units, which ends up being kind of the Gorkanaut, but the Morkanaut can do it too. Some people see the Gorkanaut as the strategic reserve unit that comes in. In this case, you can actually use the Killican unit for that as well, as they're pretty slow, but then you kind of have a hard time moving around that side of the table, right? More times than not, you're going to run the 3-man units of Killicans on the flanks of this table, or maybe even bait in the middle of the table for that. So this list is quite thought out, as I'm going to walk up with tough things. You're going to clap back at me. I'm going to actually trade out with you if it's a low, let's say low point vehicle unit that you want to kind of just delete off the table because it's getting in your way. That's where the Death Dread comes into play. He's a low cost investment, so somewhat reliably really damage something, or softens a very problematic unit before Killicans get in it, or your Morkanaut and Gorkanaut get in it. What the knobs really help too is that a lot of the time when you're facing these Titanic units, you're facing armies that can stage in buildings and then jump out and attack you with their infantry that shoots you really well. Let's say Sister of Smeltas or Eradicators, a unit of 8-bound. That's where the knobs can come in, get kind of bypass their screen, and then charge something that's in the way, trying to counter you and your Titanic units, or even your Killicans, as they're quite drastically slow. So keep that in mind as you look into this. Of course, you can use 30 or 20 grots to screen your home field, but sometimes more than not, you want to put them in your Gorkanaut and your Morkanaut, jump out, either play for the primary or act as a screening unit and or reactive unit, so that people can't really get stuck into your big Titanic models, as even though they're Titanic, they're a little bit soft. So let's take a look at Josh Morton's list. The boys, he called it. He did go 4-1, and he does take only 1 loss, but it's still one of the more popular armies in the meta. Before we go into, let me just take a look at some of the chats. Aaron, I got you. Don't worry, buddy. Whoa, for all you get. Sorry, I'm slowing down my wall, so it's not too much wall. No, we taking the chopper to Warhammer world. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you, the clip. I appreciate you. That's what we're here for, so people can kind of get stuck in and learn about what people are doing, and then adjust to your taste, right? And we'll talk about that at the end as I'll give my closing thoughts. We have, I wonder how Dread Mob will do with Gretchen being battle line units, and a lot of Pariah Nexus revolve around battle line units. You know, they're a bit softy, right? Of course, they can easily get picked up. Some armies and some players have the tools or just know to go for grots right away because of that. But forcing them to go into grots does also take away from some of their game plans sometimes. I do think that battle line units can be helpful, but they're not game changing for you. So battle line units, armies that will take battle line, or armies that already like battle line units. And lucky for us, orcs, we already like orc boys, but in Dread Mob, you already like grats. So even if you play a mission without battle line, they're good. If you play them with the battle line, you're already there, you're like, okay, that's cool. But really, you're just gonna like advance and do an action on that one. It's not like you're gonna do it while in combat unless you're taking Zod or something, right? So for grats, it's even less so than orc boys, but it's still a factor. And GW does not hate orcs. I think GW is scared of orcs, bro. Because if, back in the day, orcs, even before I played it in 8th edition, orcs get like these drastic rules that just annihilate everybody in a way that they're not used to, like getting shot. Like when you used to come up to the table and be like, I'm going to shoot you off the table, Tau, haha. And they're like, wait, I thought you were the fighting army. So I think they're just really scared of orcs, and it just causes a knee-jerk reaction. I also think GW don't really has a little bit hard time struggling with like the flavor, but understanding how our detachments are so limited based off where data sheets are stuck. If you nerf a unit for one detachment, it tends to just become unplayable in other detachments. Unless it's like a straight up melee unit, then you can take it in War Horde, and that's why people default to War Horde and always have for multiple editions. So orcs just bad touch GW a lot. And what's up, Antonio? Whoa. So let's take a look at my boy's list, because his matchups, because that's always important when you're playing Dread Mob, right? You want to see who did you end up playing to beat. Can I even take Ork and Mork? And my boy did right here. So the game he went into was Leagues of Ultan. We have an Iron Here champion, a Grimnir, a Call with Grim Demeanor, 1 unit, 2 units of these Hearthkin warriors. Of course, being able to combat squad them, so break them up into 5-man units, I think is quite useful if they transport spam, but in this case, they didn't transport spam. You have 2 Sagittars, still very good for their point cost. You got to be aware of that with scouting, infiltrating, baby boys. It's everywhere, right? Just keep that in mind. And your meta might not have adopted it yet, but it's very much on the table in most events you're going to go to. Then you have 1, 2 units of these Broknir Thunderkeen, 1 unit of the Berserkers. Remember, they're indirect. You win it, guys. Indirect weapon. It can slow you, but it has to happen on a 4+. And then we have 1, 2 units of the Hearthguard. Let's see, let me see, make sure they have the same weapons. No, they don't. One does have the plasma gun, and the other one has the Volkite disintegrators. So it is interesting to take different weapons. They take also concussion. Yeah, they both took the concussion gauntlet stuff. 1 Land Raider Fortress, followed by 2 units of Pioneers. Now, like we talked about with the nuke, like I'm talking about the Death Dread, he couldn't completely destroy something like a Land Fortress, and there's a chance the Land Fortress just straight up tanks it because he could still get great saves. So you don't necessarily want to put him into that unless he's not getting cover, because they could just Armor of Contempt and you only have 2 AP. All these different problems, but he does go good into something like a Sagittar. Sure, he's 15 points more than a Sagittar, but the point here is that you don't really have anything to kill a Sagittar reliably, and you're not looking to bounce, a Titanic unit to just peek the corner, try to shoot him, and then get hit in response and shot and then countercharged too easily. So Sagittars, they can also go down to a Luda bomb, right? Luda's ignoring cover. The SAG really goes off right there with its additional AP. Mind you, the SAG most of the time does most of the damage. And even though I'm a fan of Luda's, just understand the damage differential between being on an objective and not is drastic. And when you're not on an objective, the Ludas almost do no damage. And then it really just comes down to, does the shock attack going to do his thing? So that thing's cool with that. As for the Terminator squads, they're good for volume. They can kind of punch up into big dudes. But what's good about us is our sweep attacks do okay into them, not unless they Armor of Contempt. But our high damage smash attacks do great into them. Something like your knobs with the power, the big choppas can come in here and clean up a lot of these infantry units, such as Berserkers. If you touch Thunderkin, if you touch the guard, the basic, I call they're not guard, Hearthgear warriors, that's where you actually take advantage of the big choppas, where you're like, oh, you guys are 2 wounds, and you're just that weird toughness of 6. Well, I got something for you with volume. Bah! So I really like that. And of course, the big Mac punches moderately well too. I think we're going to see a little bit more of the Leagues of Ultan, but it's just going to take a while for them to kind of understand how they want to use their new infiltrators, or I think they're scouts or something. I'm in a brain fart right now. But it also comes down to knowing their rules and then understanding how to react when they judgment token certain units. So they would look at your Morkanot and Gorkanot and be like, I'm going to judgment token that, I'm going to judgment token that, and your Killer Can unit. And you're like, well, now I got to make do with my other Cans unit. And when it is my time to shine, it's more reactive, which means they can't take advantage of their army-wide rule if they choose your big dudes early, because you can kind of mostly hide them. And then in response, your other units, such as your Killer Cans, your Ludas, your Death Dread, can actually pop out, respond, and do a lot of damage. Then when they're reacting to you and your big Titanic stuff, they've lost some of their ability there, right? And then Killer Cans do great into something like those Thunderkin. So if you can get off on those Thunderkin and actually get a charge off into them, you're gravy. You're on the gravy train right there, and that's actually what feels really good. He did end up getting 92 points there, so I think things went his way, and he understood how to kind of maneuver having to run into their oath targets, right? But you just got to keep that in mind when you're going into Leagues of Ultium. If they oath one of my favorite units, then they don't have an army rule until I expose that oath unit. They're starting to agree, right? Then we go into the Gene Stealer cults. See, I told you we're better than that. We just beat them with Dreadmob. No, I'm just kidding. So Gene Stealer cults. Not super familiar with all of their detachments at the moment. Armies like this, you can kind of see them getting reworked anyway, so get familiar if you're going to face them, but I wouldn't be surprised if most people just don't see them. So we have the Outlander Claw, we have 3 Kelemorphs, those are the little sniper characters, a Sanctus, followed by 10, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 of Acolyte hybrids and hybrid 1 unit of hybrid metamorphs, then 3 units of Adelan Jackals. That's pretty cool. That's cool. 2 by 2 units of the Achilles Ridge Runners, and then 3 of the Goliath Rock Grinders. So what I am familiar with is I'm pretty sure these Goliath Rock Grinders will give +1 to wound when you disembark from them and do damage. This is one of those things that you're glad to have the knobs with the big choppas, as you can actually run into these units, pick up the little bit of annoying bodies they have, not necessarily die in response, and then continue to beat them up even if you take minimum damage as you move forward and on them. Ludas can go crazy if one of these units comes in off the onto an objective. Overwatch is disgusting to any of these units that are on the table. And then you, of course, for the Rock Grinder and the Achilles Ridge Runner, you do have the proper weapons to actually kill them, as this is one of the armies that doesn't have Armor of Contempt. So you're feeling really good with some of your, low AP shooting. That's typically a problem for Orks, is that we lack AP in our shooting, so we hate to see those really high toughness stuff, right? Gene Stealers don't have that. Then in his third matchup, he went into Blood Angels. Now, this was still a win before we look at his Blood Angels list, where he got 100 points. So he called this the pile of shame with the Sons of Sanguinius, where Sons of Sanguinius do quite well into a typical punching Ork army. Sometimes we have more assets than them, and it is a dice game, but Orks just seem to have tools into Blood Angels sometimes. So we have Captain with a jump pack with Artisans of War, Chaplain with jump pack, Librarian and Phobos armor, and Sanguinary Priest with a jump pack. He's fantastic, gives additional AP, and feel no pain, so that's cool. 1 big unit of Assault Intercessors. They actually get to a cool strength threshold of 6. So if these dudes, for some reason, do get into, let's say, your Killer Can unit, and especially if you're on an objective or rerolling wounds, you could take some nasty damage from that because the volume is just so intense. 1 unit of Intercessors, followed by another unit of Assault Intercessors with jump packs, 1 blue Talus Dread, a Death Company Marines with jump packs, Thunderhammers, Power Fist, Inferno Bolters, some Chainswords. You don't really want to see Chainswords on this unit, especially when you're going into this matchup where you're like, I actually want some bigger hard-hitting things with some AP. Our Titanic stuff does have a good enough strength threshold for them, but still, actually, it's all right into them, but we're still winning us on 5. We have Eliminators, Inceptor Squad, Sanguinary Guard, quite expensive, and then here's the weird part of the list: a Storm Raven gunship, and then a Storm Talon gunship. I'll just rate up right off the bat, this Storm Talon gunship, just not where it's at. I appreciate him for trying, but no thank you. Storm Raven can sometimes have its moment. You're just not really getting an army and benefit from here. Of course, he just needs more stuff like the Death Company units, as he would run out of steam into us, and we can actually kill something like a Brutalis Dreadnought. Usually some of the Ork detachments can't. The Dreadmob actually can, and Grots help with you to be able to screen, reactive screen, and it just feels really good to have, like I said, knobs with 10-man units of knobs when you're going into assault intercessors or you're going into jetpack dudes, where you want a lot of damage to in volume, and maybe even more volume because you can put sustain on them, right? And these these chain swords kind of just not where it's at for those Death Company. Not the most competitive version of Blood Angels, but they do have great rules, and Josh Morton did overcome them. Now, this is something that I'm sure a lot of people are going to be understanding and familiar with is World Eaters. World Eaters are still very popular in the meta. They're very elite armies, so they're never going to have too much variety. This one had a little more than I'm used to, as it did go pretty character heavy. So we have Angron, super annoying, obviously, coming back. If he comes back, game changing. If he doesn't, you kind of win. Karn the Betrayer, great for fighting on death. Lord Invocatus, I actually did pull up his data sheet just because I think some people are going to be more familiar and having to see him real quick so you can understand what he's doing here. He can go with something like the 8-bound, Exalted 8-bound, who have Scout, or and then he also gives 2 World Leaders within 6 inches of this model. World Eater infantry units within 6 inches of this model. All units have Scout ability 6. So he's giving Scout to units that don't have Scout, and then he has Scout as well on the units that do have Scout. So this World Eater army is going to be going crazy with its Scout, because I also can show you they're 8-bound. They're 8-bound also already have Scout. So in that case, you could put the World Lord Invocatus with them as well. Not that I'm necessarily saying you would do this with the 8-bound, but he has Scout too. So he could be with let's see, look at the list real quick before I start rambling on, because it's a weird mix of, he actually a lot of character support here. So of course, one Berserker unit's going to get Karn just because they need the Karn escort. Feels really powerful in that. The other Karn Berserker unit is more likely just getting a Lord on Juggernaut. And then one of these 8-bounds could get a character, maybe 2. They could choose not to use them because they have weird movement differentials. Just remember, 8-bound already move 8. They can get +2 to their movement. Then they can auto advance 6. So you can actually very much get around the terrain that's a problem and actually kind of conga line that unit forward and get more space out of there in distance. Now, when you look at the cheap, battle line type units with these 3 units of Jackals, 3 units of Jackals can actually slap moderately well, especially into something like a Grot unit, like as you could say. And the one thing here in this matchup when you're looking at Dread Mob is they can sticky objective the middle of the table, or even the sides of the flank objectives, causing you to have to go and commit to them with something like a 3-man unit of Killicans or something like that. And in that case, 8-bound very much can just auto advance 6, advance and charge onto you and beat the crap out of you. They have the perfect profiles as 8-bound, and these Exalted 8-bound, they have great profiles into our Titanic models. Not to mention, Angron himself can play KG because he could just stay back as well. Do the same thing of auto advance 6 for 1 CP on the strat and really get stuck into one of your Titanic models. You don't have one fight on death. Even shooting at him doesn't feel really good because he does have, a 2-up armor save. So it doesn't feel really that good with Ork AP shooting at him. You're like, oh, 3-up save? Sure, bro. Like, I hope your Death Dread really goes off right here, which he might, but then Angron might just come back. So this game's always on the table. It's so chaotic. This does require you usually to have your own fight on death and volume of reliable punching and a little bit more assets than them. In this case, because you were a Dread Mob because you're a Dread Mob list, you don't have as much assets. You're quite valuable. So if you make one mistake, it's like a 300-point mistake or something like that. Not really exactly 300, but we're rounding up a little bit, right? 250. Somewhere a little less than 300-point mistakes can easily happen. Even a unit of Berserkers can get into a 6-man unit of Killicans and really crump them. And I found my Killican shooting to be quite unreliable, even if they are with all rockets. But that's we should all just become familiar with World Eaters, as they're definitely here to stay. 42-point win, loss there, that he took from the World Eaters. I think something like War Horde does great. Lily Boyz is totally fine. And to World Eaters, Dread Mob do have that problem of you can stage very tiny units, really hard to shoot profiles, and then jump out and hit me. Not to mention that basic 8-bound give rerolling 1s to wound, mean that even Berserkers going up and punching early into your Killicans being strength 8, rerolling 1s to wound, they can still really crump you. So be familiar and just understand that screening is very important. And when you're playing War Horde, you have a little bit more tools there. Now, as for his last matchup, he went into, this is a little bit jumbled and weird to see, but this is a Dark Angels army with Gladius Task Force. He's a Librarian Terminator armor, a Lieutenant Asriel and Lionel Johnson. The Lieutenant does have Fire Discipline, and the Librarian does have Artificer Armor. He has 1 unit of Heavy Intercessors, normal 5-man unit of Intercessors, 1 Deathwing Knight unit, followed by 1 unit of Eradicators, 10 Hellblasters to take advantage of that Fire Discipline, and then Inceptor Squad with Plasma, 2 Infiltrator Squads, Inner Circle Companions, and a Gladiator Lancer. Typically, something like a Deathwing Knight unit just wants to kind of come forward and maybe even advance and charge you and take advantage of your orcs. You only have damage 2. In this case, you're dealing with a bunch of damage 3, even damage 6. They can end up taking huge losses here. Eradicators can do very well into Titanic, but like I said, we can actually wait it out and then just touch and tag onto an objective. Eradicators do have to get relatively close. That's why something like Knobs is really good for that. You can run out and actually punch those units that are trying to stage up on you. Hellblasters are the problem where they can actually volume out Killicans super reliably, but you being able to reduce damage by 1 means you could just take it for a ride and actually try to survive that. What it comes down to here is he doesn't have enough units that can actually deal with our high toughness. Intercessors are doing nothing. Heavy Intercessors are doing nothing. These 2 units of Infiltrators doing nothing. The Lancer can maybe kill, you're going to kill 1 Killican a turn if your big unit Titanic units are coming out. So Dread Mob is not, I'm going to put all my big stompy stuff right in your face right away and take all your damage. It's put these Killicans forward and try to draw beta stuff out. So before we go back, we're going to go back to the list here. But he did end up winning this one. We're going to go over a little bit more of Dark Angels. I'm going to show this because actually both players we went over today went over Dark Angels, so I think it's good that we come familiar with Dark Angels. So let's take a look at something like this Deathwing Knight squad, right? Just keep in mind up here I have it as Inner Circle because on the other list we're going to cover does that. But Gladius, everybody's pretty familiar. They have access to Lance, so they can still get +1 to wound. They can advance and charge. That's the strength of a Gladius. Go keep that in mind when you're looking at these Deathwing. Now, these Deathwing do have Inner Circle, which is where they subtract damage by 1. They have Mortal Wound ability to ignore Feel No Pain once per battle. Oops, sorry, I'm showing up too much stuff. And then they actually have, depending on the person, some people like to bring swords, some people bring maces. I think maces are more common and more likely to be up in your face. They are 4 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 6, -2, 2+, but they're also anti-monster, anti-vehicle, 2 4+4+. So keep in mind of these Deathwing Knights, they're going to be common. You can take 3 big bricks of them. Something like Dread Mob actually has tools to kill them, but if you see something like a Warhorde list, you're going to struggle a little bit more, or even like a Bully Boys list where you might just be like, oops, all my stuff is damaged too. I don't think I'm killing you reliably. Oops. So before we do that, I also want to take a look at the Librarian Terminator, just because in this case, he was actually on this list when I showed it, right? Librarian Terminator armor right here, bloop, just so you guys can see. He can also go with Deathwing Knights, and what he does is he gives them the Sustain 1 ability, and then they keep their Feel No Pain, but nobody cares about that because they already have that. And he, of course, gives them a little bit of Witch Fire for shooting, but it's not a big deal. The real thing here is that he gives them Sustain 1. They're already hitting on 2s, increases their volume and reliable damage output because they can't just simply stand there as a 5-man unit. They can take losses, so they do want to crack you back a bit when you hit them. So now, before I end it, let's take one more look at my boys' Dread Mob list, just for all those who just got here so you can see them. We have a Big Mac, Custom Mega Blaster, Big Mac with Shock Attack Gun, Get Finder Goggles for the 10-man unit of Ludas. 2 mechs, 1 each for the Gork and the Mork, 4 minimum size units of Gretchen, 1 truck to escort that Knob with Big Chopper unit and their Big Mac, 2 3-man units of Killicans, 1 big unit of Killicans, followed by the Nuke Death Dread, where he just has 4 custom Mega Blasters, jumps out, pops some CP, hopes to take something down with them, rolls a bunch of hazard checks, blows himself up. Bam! Love to see it. I actually really like this list. Very flavorful. I hope this encourages a lot of people to play Dread Mob and understand that you can very much play with the Gork and Mork. It is, of course, meta dependent. If you're playing on UKTC with something like Astra Militarum, I'm sorry, your Gork and Mork are going to get beat up and shot off the table kind of reliably. If you're going into Dark Eldar and all the Dark Lances are on the table, you're probably going to get killed quite reliably. So there are armies, maybe Tau, that are going to reliably destroy your Gork and Mork. But as we went for over several of the events and lists, over the list today, some of those lists just simply didn't have the tools to kill the Killicans in a reliable effort without overcommitting their most expensive units, and then that allowed the Gork and the Morks to come out and start killing stuff for point value trades. The knobs to be able to run through screens, I'm sure, did come into play once in a while, as people did have infiltrators and scouts in their armies. So then that's where you can kind of run through terrain, not only run through terrain, but run through the screens and then hit the soft, juicy target that's trying to hide in a building like a unit of eradicators. So that's how this list most likely played out. Tell me if I'm wrong if you're out there, Josh Morton. But let's get a whoa for Josh Morton and his dread mob. Love to see it. Now I'm going to take a look at the comments real quick. Sorry, I'm moving some of these things around. Let me take a look at the comments real quick before we look at the next list. Let's get a shout out to Murder Mouth, Blood Captain, 10 Wall Tactic gifted memberships. Whoa! We do, of course, do our raffles. We do have our badges for that. We're coming out with more content. It's a bit of work in progress on what we want to do. So we hope to make better benefits for that so you guys can be more encouraged. But thank you for supporting. It means a lot, and it definitely helps us. We do our raffles, and it helps us for our, our paint competitions as well. We like to give out prizes and have a good time. He says, we are the Orks. We as Orks are at the time of greatest creativity. We are the underdogs right now. Gonna bully. Good boss. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of a good way to put it. Is since we're the underdogs and people aren't taking us too serious, you see a lot of weird off the wall stuff happening where people are bringing the Hunt, the Dread Mob, making an appearance. But we haven't seen is Cult of Speed. Cult of Speed players. Let's get a shout out here so that you guys can start showing representing. I know it's hard though. Trust me, because I have a huge Cult of Speed collection. We have the Drunken Ork. I'm running MSU War Horde and having some success with 3x5 knobs with War Boss, 2x10 snaggers with Beast Bosses. Yeah, for sure. 3x10 Grot units, 3x5 Flash Kits. So he has 3 SWAT teams there. Also running 2 Shock Attack guns with 5 Looters. They're cheap and trade up. They trade up because even without the button, the Shock Attack gun does work. So I agree with you there. He's pretty nice. I even consider, like, what about just one mech gun? Just one shot, smash a gun, just because you get more AP and that extra damage in case you fail to actually kill something. But the looters can actually move through terrain and stuff, right? So yeah, now we're going to look at the next list, and the next list is award from my boy Josh Colward. Josh Colward has actually appeared on the channel, not like person, but we've covered his list before, so he's a well-proven Ork player. He's not a meta chaser, even though he has great success with Ork. So let's take a look at his Horde list. We have 1 Beast Boss, only 1 on foot. A War Boss with Follow Me Lads, another War Boss, no enhancements, Boss Nikra, and Ghazghkull Thraka. Of course, Ghazghkull Thraka is amazing in War Horde. You love to see that. 3 battle line units, 1 of them being Beast Nagas, 2 of them being Boyz. And we're back to the 4 truck combo, my boys. If you're playing War Horde and you're going to end up kind of using a lot of transports, kind of goes into what I said at the intro of the video is a lot of the time when we played War Horde, Index Hammer, trucks were in play, War Bosses and units disembarking was always in play. So it's not surprising that it's coming back. It is good to see a 10-man unit of Flash Kits on this list, as I think they're still quite useful and valuable. I think they need to cut knob keyword, guys. Let's push for that, right? If GW does come back to us, give Flash his knob keyword. Come on, dude. They'd be sick and bully boys. 2 mega knobs. That way they could just escort Gaz. What's funny here is he took 1 kill saw and 1 power claw. So he was very much like, wound good enough. I don't really need wound rerolls. The shooter really sucks, so I don't really need the shooter. I'm just going to have either power claw for more attacks, or I'm going to have the kill saw for more AP. That's it. Then he went for 2 10-man units of knobs. Of course, the Scalpel unit, both with power claws. I'd love to see that. And then 3x5 Storm Boy units. That way he can still try to play the mission. So he has the 2 10-man units of Boyz, run out, do nice little trades, get in little skirmishes, block people off, sticky objectives, Storm Boys to run around, do secondaries, trucks to kind of stand on things as you continue to move forward. Very, very holistic based version of the War Horde. Of course, I can see more people not taking gas and just bringing more Beast Bosses, as we talked about in earlier comments. I'm on the train of running 2 Beast Bosses myself, but Gaz, if you're used to playing with him and you understand, I'm gonna have to pop Here We Go to kind of cover some distance. Really need to Krump something that has great, wounds and high durability. The Gaz really does get stuck in because armies I face tend to go to the middle of the table. Then he's a really good points because with the deployment zones and the changes of the terrain, playing like the terrain game of leapfrogging forward and counter punching is a huge factor here. And Gaz can still find his way around the table where he's at. So he was at the Winchester 40K GT. This was in England. Again, like we said, it was a slower weekend. Therefore, this was a 30-man event for a GT, which, like we said, is a little bit on the lower end than some of us are used to, but that's okay. You know, like I said, Josh Colward has proven himself in other previous versions in Index Hammer and such, where he's a consistent Ork player. So he's definitely well refined and he knows what he's trying to do out here. So let's take a look at what Joshua Colward ran into. Now, before we look right in, just want to point out obvious thing right here. He did lose his first game. You know, some people go, well, ouch, you know, that makes me wonder about him and his line of fire and fighting. I get it. But when you put up a 199 and a 93 still in Nexus, that means you're still doing something very, very much right. So he really put high scoring points, right? But if he was at a larger player event, he probably wouldn't have got second place from losing first game. But because he scored so high and did everything so well further on, it was still an excellent job by him. So let's look at what he ran into. Because, like I said, we're going to talk about Dark Angels yet again. But in this case, he brought the Inner Circle Task Force. It's a bit up in the air as for which version is better, right, is what you would want to say. Which version of Dark Angels do you think is better? I think the version that becomes more interesting sometimes is the Inner Circle one, at least going up against Orks. So let's look at his units, and then I'll look over some of their combos and buffs so that way you get an idea. We have Azrael, because he's on every list, a Captain in Terminator, and a Librarian in Terminator armor, followed by simply one unit of Deathwing Knights. Of course, again, we see the Mace of Absolution. Then we have a unit of Hellblasters. 1, 2 Inceptor squads, both with Assault Bolters. 2 units of Scouts. Like we said, there's always people playing the mid-table early, guys, trying to stage up. And then in this case, he went for double big units of Terminators. And when we look at, normally you look at these Terminators and you're like, I don't know. We'll talk about how that actually comes into play. And then Gladiator Lancer. So for this, let's take a look again at Deathwing Knights for those who are new. Inner Circle, of course, they get -1 damage. They get a fun redeployment from their teleport homer, where at the start of the battle you can set it up, and then kind of rapid ingress over there for 0 CP. But really what's interesting about them is when you do take something, what's different about Inner Task Force is Vowed Target. So this is the Inner Circle detachment rule, which I think has been updated and made better. So what happens is at the start of your movement, select one of the following: defensive footing or aggressive footing, aggressive push, excuse me. So you can pick one objective if you're defending, which is I just want one that I already control. And then they're considered my vowed objective marker, which stacks with what their rules are. Or you get aggressive push, where you can select one or more that you do not control that are considered vow. And what that means is each time a Deathwing infantry unit from your army makes an attack that targets a unit within one or more of your vowed objective markers, you add 1 to the wound roll, meaning that you get +1 to wound on everything you don't own. Yes, everything you don't own. You get +1 to wound on anybody you're fighting on there. That's pretty freaking awesome. And, you know, when you're trying to push the game and you're running a bunch of Terminators, because Terminators are at that weird threshold where they're like, I'm strength 8. And you're like, I don't know, man. I'm not really that intimidated. And then like, I get +1 to wound. You're like, oh, okay, I'm starting to hear you. But then on top of that, you can get for 1 CP, you get Deathwing infantry unit that has not been selected to fight. You can reroll wound rolls of 1, or if you're on a vowed objective marker, you can just reroll the whole wound roll. So if you're going to something that's very tough, that you are wounding on 4s, let's say, because it was higher than your strength 8, whatever it may be, then you're going to get rerolling wounds against that and +1 to wound. That feels pretty dang good right there. Not to mention that these guys have a 3-inch deep strike. So you have in your movement phase 1 Deathwing unit from your army that's arriving in deep strike can affect 3 inches away from you. So you can take one of those big 10-man units of Terminators, drop them 3 inches away from your grots that you're using the screen, and then you can shoot them away and charge something behind them. So that means even your screens need to be kind of set in a way that your you know, we'll say 6 inches away from even your screen. There's an inch from your screen, your bases of your models, maybe a little more, and then 3 inches from that. So you're hoping, okay, now you can get like a 10-inch, 9-inch, 8-inch charge, because otherwise they can't charge from there. But just remember, the next turn, you're trying to move block them. They're going to move a little close, shoot away your grots, and then they're going to try to charge you, right? Because they cannot drop within 3 and then charge you. But it does let them easily stage in terrain, easily stage on your weak flanks of the table, and kind of start to push you. Of course, we've seen that they have a librarian, so that means now they're getting +1 to wound, re-rolling wounds, and then they also have sustained 1. And we already know that Deathwing Knights at least already hit on 2s, and then the basic Terminator squads, just data sheet wise, they get +1 to hit. I believe I have to double check that real quick, but Terminators greatly benefit from this. They're storm bolters, which are typically just bouncing off some of our infantry, right? Our boys or our beast snaggers are like, well, you got bolters, what the just like 2 guys fall over. Well, if they're getting +1 to wound, if you're on an objective and they shoot you and they can choose to reroll wounds against you because they dropped it in 3 of you and they can't charge you that turn, you know, they can just try to shoot you, right? So you can see in a way that they're like, let me make sure that's not only melee, right? It's not only melee, is it? Oh, no, it's a 5 face. Okay, they're not rerolling wounds. Thank God, they're not rerolling wounds, but they're getting +1 to wound against you, and they're still getting sustained 1, which means, you know, they are doing moderately well because storm bolters still can destroy boys if they're wounding them on 4s. That's how it really used to be for a lot of the game until boys went to T5. So this can be an issue. They have assault cannon, so they can shoot you up with that. And then a couple of them have cyclone missile launchers and everything like that. So into a Ward Horde list, this oddly, even though this player didn't end up doing well for the rest of the event, because he was such a hard skew into 2-up armor save and reliable damage output with +1 to wound with all their small arms fire, means they were able to deal with a lot of these units that you see on this list. As you see, flash kits don't really do much into Terminators, but Terminators with +1 to wound or even just straight data sheets can really beat up flash kits. All these boys and snagger boys aren't really enjoying anything they're fighting. It comes down to, can my knobs get stuck in and really erase something? Even a jacked out knob unit can, you know, hopefully kill 1 Terminator. Well, not 1 Terminator unit. If the Armor of Contempt, I believe you're more likely to kill about 5 or 6. You know, you lost some of your attacks from your war boss and such. Even with, and I'm including the wall with lethal sustain because you're still saving on 3+. So you're going to put a ton of wounds on them, but they're going to make a lot of saves and then probably lose about 6 of their guys. But they still have some guys left, and then you're getting clapped back with everything left, or the Deathwing Knights might just tank it because it's all damage 1 and they're 4 wounds. So it's just, in a weird way, that's just how that kind of ends up looking. You have to surgically get in there and really try to cut out those Terminators in a nice, reliable fashion. And I have a feeling that Joshua just wasn't that familiar with Deathwing Knights. The Dark Angels, because he did end up having to face them again. So shout out to Josh Colward. Yes, you did lose that one, but it was a very hard skew into what we know Orks aren't really loving to see, which is a bunch of 2-up armor saves. You did have the tools, and you proved to be able to overcome this later, but this is why we're covering this, because I want you guys to be familiar with these Dark Angels lists, as they're kind of like a easy army to play in a lot of ways, because they're going to just kind of stat check you and just hope that you bounce off them. And as an Ork player, you really might. So know the rules and kind of know to navigate around them, right? Don't stand on an objective if you don't want to get wounded in +1. He might have just not known that, because I believe that was a new change. Now we're going into his second matchup, where he did seek an extreme redemption here, and he put up 100 points onto this list. We have a Acadian command squad with all the fixings, Gaunt's Ghost with all the fixings with their really cool shenanigans, Lord Solar Leontis, because he's a staple in this. And remember, guys, pretty sure this was on UKTC. Can I look at that or no? The train. I mean, this is in the UK, and so yeah, UKTC token applied for here. ITC point rankings. So we know that this was actually not favorable, but better terrain for guard than maybe in America would be, right? So this is an intimidating matchup for Warhorde. 1 Cadian Shock, 2 Cadian Shock, 1 unit of Catachan, and it's simply a minimum size unit. Oh, lucky for you. 2 Chimeras, followed by 1 big unit of the Bull Grid, a Hydra, a Khazarkin unit, Lehman Russ Battletech, Lehman Russ Exterminator, Manticore, and 2 Rogel Dorns. While that's significant, is the Rogel Dorns are doing it just, I'm going to stand in this lane and blow you away if you peek yourself. What's good here is what used to really be problematic for orcs is these manticores used to just be like, I'm going to pop your transport and then I'm going to kill what's in your transport. They're not as reliably doing that, which means you can actually stage a lot easier, even on UKTC terrain, where they have kind of nice L-shaped little ruins that you can kind of stick your body in, hug the wall, like, don't shoot me. And he doesn't have a lot of like big bricks of 20-man units of infantry. Keep in mind, they're not constantly bringing back units as they used to. They're only doing it one. So I would like to have seen if he had at least one unit of 20 guys, like these Catachans, I could just run them, kind of avoid the pressure. And then when you kill them and they come back and they get in the way again, that could be cool. But he just didn't have that. This comes down to, does the guard player make the right screening and positioning changes that he needs so that the orc player can't simply run into him, punch him, tag his tanks, survive some of the shooting, hold him back in the deployment zone, deny his scoring on secondaries because he killed all his scoring secondary units. Orc player might get tabled at the end, but he stopped you from scoring. You're not bringing your annoying chaff back anymore to play late game scoring. Don't have scions on this list to jump down and score for you secondaries in that case. Therefore, you kind of have to run into this war horde, and all the trucks allow you to stage in position. You can't disrespect orcs like you could normally do in other war horde detached like mix-ups, where you actually have a beast boss, but you also have Ghazghkull Thraka, where you're like, well, even your Bulgrin, I can just run in and kind of disrespect them if I want to. And if you put a tank in the middle, which some people will do, we'll just say, I'm just going to put this Lehman Russ and kind of act as a screen because he's not really that important in points, and I can hold you here and I'm standing on the objective. Well, with Gaz, you're just giving them something to punch and then pile, consolidate, and get closer to you. And then, of course, 2-up invuln can always be rode in this matchup and get lucky. So great job by Josh. I'm not saying it was luck. I'm saying that you understood what to do and you redeemed yourself there. Playing against orcs sometimes can be very hard for orc guard players. They need a lot of stuff to get in the way and preemptively think, where's the orc player going to end up after his charges? And a lot of time they just don't think like that because they're trying to just shoot you as hard as they can early. Then we have this third matchup where we have the Awakened Dynasty. This is more commonly coming up as a detachments, but it is a bit skewed. And you'll see in this list, he was a little bit too skewed for my liking. So he did have a Catan Shard of the Night, Satan Shard of the Deceiver, and he had Luminar Caesaris. What I will say is Luminar Caesaris is like old Gaz if you're not familiar, except for he gives an aura of reduce AP by 1. He's infantry, and I think he's only T8, but he does have a 2-up base armor save and a built-in armor of contempt and a 4-up feel no pain. So he's quite obnoxious to kill. What I will say is a 10-man unit of knobs with a war boss, with lethal, sustain, crit 5s can pick up Luminar Caesaris in one shot. It's not a great trade for points, but if the Necron player just like disrespects you like that and just says, I'm going to stand here because Luminar has tanked a lot of other things, knobs are one of those units that can just straight clean his clock, which means you're just left with a Catan. And of course, like I always like to say, if you're not putting him into Luminar and you're just hoping Gaz can go into him and maybe some knobs instead, and you're using your Beast Boss, re-rolling critical 5 to sustain and lethal, and then re-rolling the hit roll, you can then instead choose to just pick the volume into the Katana, the Night Deceiver, and just kill him by straight volume by putting a ridiculous amount of damage 1 hits into him by having sustain and lethal on the 5+, and re-rolling to fish for that, and then throwing some death wounds into him and hoping he fails some of those mortal wounds. So those saves, those feel no pain saves. So if you choose to critical lethal on one of these units or the other, just know in the end, either one in our friend Joshua Colward's list, he has the tools to kill both these units. Of course, you do need the CP for the Catan version, but for just Luminar Caesaris, if you put Gaz into him and then just some knobs, you could still just crack really, really hard because Gaz could just be like, I'm going to sweep attack you, or I'm just going to crump you for 4 damage and get sustain and lethal. So there we go. So the rest of his list, because it's very thin, he has Chronomancer, Heckmark Destroyer, Overlord, Plasmancer, Technomancer, because he has 3 10-man units of Immortals, so he's stacking these shooting profiles he can. He has a Tesla, and then 2 of them have Gauss Blasters, 1 Crypto Thrall, a Scarab unit Swarm, and then 3 of these Doomsday Arcs. That's why I was so honed in and focused on these 2 characters, because there's very much that he was either playing the flanks with each character on one side, or playing the flank with one of them, and then just kind of staging in the middle with Luminar Caesaris. and just taking lines of fire. And then when you try to get closer, he runs at you with these guys or tries to bulwark you. And Orks can actually be like, oh, you want to bulwark me for this one turn with these couple units? I'm just going to run you over. And that's this thing that we just have in our back pocket against Necrons, especially if you're playing War Horde. So keep that in mind. That's where like the knobs work. That's where the Beast Boss works. And that's where really Gaz really shines, where he allows you to kind of clean the clock of a Necron unit or the army on that one WAAAGH go turn. That's really where Gaz shines, because he can lead to that more reliable, assured outcome. Now, for the fourth list, we have, again, Necrons, and it's going to be similar kind of concept as to the kind of damage Ork can kind of provide here. But he is a Hypercrypt Legion, and he has the Silent King. The Silent King can tell people, hey, I'm going to ignore modifiers. That way, even though you're War Horde, he's not going to allow you to reduce toughness. Then he has, of course, his minions. He has Emotech the Stormlord, an Overlord with the Resurrection Orb, Chronomancer, and a Transcendent Catan, followed by 1 unit of Immortals, a Hexmark Destroyer to score, 1 unit of the Lich Guard with the War Scythe. They're just not durable in that case, but they can clap and kind of close the distance quickly, so be careful. 2 units of Flayed Ones, because like I keep saying, playing the early game mid-table is very important for a lot of these different factions. And then 2 units of Locust Destroyers that we can just drop down and score. A Reanimator, because, you know, I guess he wants to keep these Lich Guard alive or these Immortals. I think, you know, when they don't have the shields, they're much more likely to die. And then a Monolith. This list very comes down to, can the Necron player preemptively understand where he needs to end up and not get countercharged on the go turn when he Hypercrypt and comes down? Because Gaz is one of the few units that's like, oh, I can actually kill a Monolith if I get into him. Even the unit of the Lich Guard are getting picked up by knobs on the problematic turn. Transcendent Catan is still falling into the same issue, that if he runs into the Beast Boss on the go turn and he kind of gets picked up as well, Orks have the way to do that. Remember, you have grenades, you have all these trucks that you can tank shock certain units if you really have to, and Flash Gits can actually shine into some of these units, like I just said, when it comes down to something like the Lich Guard unit, where you're just like, well, you guys don't have rate up saves anymore, so I guess you're just gonna get sustained and lethal once, and then I'm gonna try to charge you. That could really be a factor too. So in our boy Joshua's case, he just systematically had tools to deal with these matchups he's going into. It does take your finesse as an Ork player to understand staging and when to commit and how to play against Hypercrypt, as it's still problematic and tough. This is a skill-based game for him to kind of overcome Hypercrypt, because as soon as you mess up, they disembark your trucks and then they shoot you away. Manir reliably kills your truck. Monolith reliably kills your truck, and then if you get stuck in combat with it, it can auto hit you. So this was a skill-based game. That's why it's not to be understated that even though he had the tools for it, it does require you as an Ork player to be quite refined with your playman and when to activate what strats when, right? Your Beast Boss and your Beast Snagger boys, if you just run into a Catan and you're not trying to go lethal, sustain, 5+ critical, unbridled carnage, re-rolling the hit roll to fish, then you're just not doing anything to Catan. If you're not doing that one specific thing, you're not doing anything to Catan. And that's why it's like, okay, I need to understand how I'm doing these combos. And then as for his last matchup, he found redemption. He said, it's the Lion Man, right? So Dark Angels came in again. But in this case, it was the Vanguard Spearhead. So he wasn't dealing with the Inner Circle shenanigans and additional wound rolls, but he also wasn't dealing with a Terminator spam. So let's look. We have Azrael. Did I show Azrael last time? Hopefully I did. But for Azrael, what he does is he also gives you a sustain 1, which on the other Dark Angels list with the Hellblasters, he most likely had them with them, and then they were getting sustain 1 because Hellblaster's right here. So he's getting sustain 1, and he's getting additional CP from Azrael. He has a Lieutenant with Shadow of War, and then Lionel Johnson. Right away, you can see no Terminator characters. So you have the Assault Intercessors, 1 Centurion Devastator Squad with twin las cannons and fire missile launchers, of course. 2 units of Deathwing Knights, but as we've seen, they do not have their character support. They're not getting sustained. They're not getting free strats. They're just chilling. Then we have an Inceptor Squad with the Plasma Incinerators. Very good. They can very much go off, but the problem here is if you're staged in trucks and they come down and they're trying to pop your truck, yes, they could pop your truck, but now you're just kind of in the open, right? So the timing of the Plasma Inceptors of actually coming down and killing you is like, oops. Hey, thank you, Brian. I should have noticed that earlier. Yeah, no wonder I messed up. Sorry, let's look at his list. Hopefully I didn't mess up. How long? Which list did you not see? Let me know so I can go back and show the list. But we have Intercessor Squad, Centurions right here, Deathwing Knights, 2 of them, the Inceptor Squad with Plasma Incinerators, followed by 3 Scout units, an Evasaur Assassin, and a Voidsman at Arms. So thank you for that shout out. But like I said before, he doesn't have things to disembark the trucks other than Centurion Devastators, and he's trying to play the shenanigan of come off the table edges and shoot you. You're going to get blown up in your truck, stage in the building, and then run up and try to attack him. Of course, he can reactively move, but at some point, he does have to interact to play the game. He is going to commit his Deathwing Knights into you, and they don't have the same offensive output as they did in Inner Circle, where they're re-rolling +1 to wound, re-rolling wound rolls in the fight phase, pretty much stacking both of those, and then also getting sustained where they can be like, I'll just clean up all 10 of your knobs in this one punch. In this case, you're not. And if you do punch them, they can still fight on death and try to chew you down more. And then Gaz can come in and try to finish you off. And like I said, this is just very elite with not a lot of activations nor a lot of volume. And I'm sure that he was just understood what he had to kind of allocate resources here to. And it's killing the things you can that are trying to score. That way late game he can't. And then you come in and you just jump whatever's left. All right. So that's how that went. You do have to play the I'm not letting you come in wherever you want game for this Vanguard Spearhead, which is very different than playing against the Inner Circle. Just in case I didn't show the other list, this was the Hypercrep list with the Silent King, Emotech Stormlord, Overlord, Chronomancer, Transcendent Catan, 1 Immortal, Hexmark Destroyer, Lich Guard right here with the War Scythes, though, 2 Flayed ones for infiltrating, then the 2 Locust Destroyers for scoring, a Reanimator, and a Monolith. That was for his 4th matchup. Just in case I missed it, I just want to go over this real quick. His 3rd matchup was against the Awakened Dynasty, which was that weird, very character-heavy, only 2 big bricks to stand in the middle of the table, which is just a Deceiver, Luminor Caesaris. Then he has a bunch of characters, and then just simple 30 battle line infantry units with Crypto Thrall, Scarab Swarm, and then 3 Doomsday Arcs, which are hard to kill. And they are respectable for shooting, but they're not as intimidating as some of the other Necron vehicle gun platforms, which are the Triax Stalkers or something like that. As for a second matchup, like I said, it was Guard with Gaunt's Ghost, Lord Soul, Leontis, 2 Cadian Shock Squads, a Catachan unit. Those are all minimum size units. 2 Chimeras, 1 Bulgren Scott, a Hydrid, a Kazarkin, Lehman Russ Battletake, Exterminator, Manticore, and 2 Rogodorns. And this is on UKTC terrain. Hopefully I didn't mess up and I showed the first list that he lost to, which was Azrael, Captain Terminator Armor, Librarian Terminator Armor, Deathwing Knights, Hellblaster, 2 Inceptor Squads with Bolters, Scout Squad, 2 Terminator units, and then a Gladiator Lancer. See, the difference here between the Dark Angels list that he beat and the one he lost to is these guys have Lancers, they have some missile launchers to shoot, they get +1 to wound, so they can even try to chip down something like a truck if it's not an objective. Inceptors that are small units, so they can drop in a little easier and really shoot stuff that's trying to hide. Hellblaster Squad, so they can shoot away volume and semi-durable units, because he's also getting Azrael sustain 1 with them, and all these Terminators, one of them's getting sustained from the Librarian, and then the Captain is also assisting as well. So this is more of he's doubling down on those couple elite bricks, and then everything else is not elite, which means he gets the volume for what his kills are and the value in his kills and durability, but then he also gets the small activations to kind of interact with you and kill you. Plus, stacking all that 2-up armor saves just completely invalidates Joshua Callward's flash kits. So let's take a look at his list one more time. It's time to fight Warhorde. He has Beast Boss, War Boss on foot with Follow Me Lads, War Boss for Snicker Out, Ghazghkull Thraka, 2 10-man units of Boyz, Beast Snagga Boyz, 4 trucks because trucks are back in town, a 10-man unit of Flash Kits because they're all still awesome, and sometimes you just need something to shoot and get rid of things with Sustain Lethal, 1 unit of Gretchen only, 2 Mega Knobs just to escort gas, 2 10-man units of Knobs with Power Claws because they're awesome in Warhorde, followed by 3 units of Storm Boys. Very much the baseline archetype, solid, a little bit of everything from what's really good in Warhorde, taking advantage of gas and the Beast Boss, and still having the Knobs of Power Claw. So you have AP, you have volume of damage, and you have flash kits. That way you can still shoot some stuff away. Plus you can get good skirmishes for 160 points. Pretty dang good skirmishing unit for 160 points. Then We have 5 gifted WAAAGH Tactic memberships from Ecop. Whoa, my boy, I see you out there. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And yeah, Josh, you were right, buddy. Should we see on the people's list? I messed up if I didn't show you the list. I failed you guys when I was doing it. Oh my god, I don't know how that happened. Well, I do know how that happened. I failed to press the button. He said, "Give trucks the speed freak keyword." If they nerfed our Coptas, that would just be very annoying. They're already very mid, right? Don't. Why would they need? Who's talking about nerfing Coptas, dude? We do need more Cult of Speed Resurrection. Power bump on buggies would go nice. I just hope they don't nerf Keptas to go with it. You know, speaking of Cult of Speed, I think it's very interesting that one of the very few times you see GW deliberately telling you cannot stack these strats is in Cult of Speed, where they tell you cannot do sustain and lethal in the same unit. So many other armies are like, I'll just do that all game. They went out of their way to make sure that Cult of Speed couldn't stack that to get reliable damage. That's pretty crazy when you really, really think of that in the big perspective of thing. When does GW really go out of the way to be that balanced and that cautious? And I'll tell you why they do that. They do that because Orks keep beating people up and bad touching them at different points in the meta as a whole. And just all across 40k as a whole. So that's why it seems like GW hates Orks, but they really don't. I think they've just been bad touched by them a lot, and they're a bit worried about how they really should see them. I think that's why we shouldn't react so super, disdained and angry at GW. I think we should just let them know the error of their ways and things we want to see, a little bit of support and things we want. Don't even let us be OP. Don't even get us back to feel no pain. Just make something like a tank buster make sense. Make Squigpocalypse boys cost a little less. Make Commando's tongue a little less. Make Death Jets cost a little less. There's a bunch of different things you could do that you could just lower points in these other key units, and it wouldn't be devastating because they're still very niche kind of data sheets, but they help in their niche detachment, right? But we'll talk about that at the end because I have one more list to show you guys when we're talking about niche detachments and units, right? So in this case, we actually have a Squigpocalypse list, right? And this list actually did come from an RTT, but this RTT came from Colin McCade, which is someone who we covered last week, and he had a Bully Boys list where he did very well. So I still think it's pretty awesome that he's trying something different back-to-back weekends. Quick RTT, so I'm not going to show you everything. I'm just going to tell you what he faced real quick and just look at it. And the reason I wanted to show this is because, one, the hunt is always something that's brought into contention. Should I just play War Horde instead? This seems kind of dumb because you could just run away from your vehicles because you run away and I don't have an army rule. Those are both very valid. But one thing they can't do as well is Squigpocalypse. And in this case, he did bring the hunt, and he did end up running into Astra Militarum in his first matchup, so plenty of tanks for something them to play there. Leagues of Voltan, where he ran into Statuars and Land Raider Fortresses. Bunch of stuff to activate there. Keep in mind, both of those units do not want to be pressured. And then he went into Necrons, which, like we said with War Horde, Orks actually have the volume of things to actually kill you in this case. So let's take a look at his list real quick. He had Squigpocalypse Da Hunt. He went into Beast Boss as Squigosaur, which surely has a Squig off, because you need that nice durability increase. Beast Boss on Squigosaur with Glory Hog, because everybody loves the thick scouting potential. Mazrong Scrag Bag. He did lose the monster keyword, so that's actually pretty nice into certain matchups. And then the Weird Boy, because who doesn't like a 20-man unit of Weird Boys to jumping behind a scouting Squig Hog Boy unit, right? You're just like scout and then drop these guys right here, and then now we're going to wall turn 2 and we're staged up. I'm going to take one of these other guys off the table, and then I'm going to bring them on the table on the table edge. So it's kind of hilarious how that kind of worked out. 1 10-man unit of boys, just because you got to have something stay back and be sticky. A 10-man unit of Grots, just to try to farm CP. 3 fat max unit of Squigs, followed by 3 Storm Boys. He absolutely went for almost 0 trading here. He said, brick of boys, bricks of Squigs, get in your face. It's the apocalypse, baby. And he brought no vehicles. Not only did he not bring trucks, not only did he not bring beast bosses on foot with proper killie, he didn't bring a single kill rig. He didn't bring a battle wagon. None of that. He went straight up off the deep end, into Squig Hog Boy heaven. So if you're one of those gets that has a bunch of Squig Hog Boys, or you just did the addition and you did it, maybe you just have a themed army, you know what? Maybe just going YOLO for a back max unit of boys, because at least they're not benefiting from the detachment, but they're benefiting from the wall, and they can still jump forward, kind of be with the theme of pressure, you can really become problematic for some armies. And a lot of the meta, you know, if you're talking about an RTT where you're less likely to run into your predatory matchups, the really hard matchups, and you're just more likely to get stat checked just because it's a lower bar threshold of skill, people just trying to get some games in, whatever it may be. It's more likely than not, people are going to have vehicles and stuff for you to interact with and go for. And then in the cases they don't, you kind of still have enough shenanigans with scouting, coming off the table edge, reactive moving to still get stuck in and start killing people. So I thought it'd still be fun to show Colin McCade's list, not too deep onto what he went into, as it was just an RTT, but it was Astra Militarum, Leagues of Voltan, and Necron. So not irrelevant, you know, factions to be nonetheless, but just food for thought, because the hunt's still something that we all keep talking about. Then we have right here, Cult of Speed needs Storm Boys as a battle line, right? Or they need the Bikers as a battle line. How about that? Bikers as battle line. How about give us that? Because then we take advantage of Nexus. If you're going to take away our ability to score secondaries by being an assault-based army, not that you intentionally went out of your way to do that, but the repercussions of that happening, well, an easy adjustment is make the Bikers battle line, and then sometimes they can still do that. Cool thing, right? So that'd be cool. Then we have, oh, what's up, Mike Rat? He says, what up, boys? Tuning in during a Cunning Gym sesh. Quick question. Do we think Ork players are the swollest 40K faction? In my opinion, it's no contest. Let's see. Who are our matchups? Who would be another swole person? You know, because we have Mr. 2 here, and he's a stunty. You know, so stunty players are not swole. You know, they might be thick, right? But they're not going to be swole players. You know, Mr. 2. But what we will say is, if we had to, I'd say some World Eater players, right? I ran into some thick World Eater players that have some swollenness to them. But all in all, you know, we the most swole, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, yeah, definitely Ork players are the most swole. What I would say is a cunning gym session. What is, I don't know exactly what that means, you know, because usually it's brutal gym session. But thank you for that, buddy. I appreciate that. So let me just give my closing thoughts. Of course, you guys continue to hit me up in chat. I'll reply to that. But what I would say is, all in all, we have a lot left on the table to go over. The season is young. Our detachments are really not fully fledged out. You know, people haven't really gone deep into them. This means I get to now revisit them all in a different kind of light, different play testing, and that means I'll come with more relevant how to play these detachment videos, which is what I'm working on now. That we can talk about how to play Bully Boys now, maybe some ways to think about the hunt in a different way and the kind of tempo of that game. How do you want the now archetype for the War Horde? So those are going to be things we're going to be bringing into play. Of course, I also want to take, you know, maybe do some after action report summaries, not necessarily bat reps, but showing how games are developing and playing, and I'm testing and matchups I see as I get to see a lot of really competitive lists. So all in all, there's more to come. We have a lot to learn. If anything, this is just the beginning of a new dawn, boys. If we're the underdogs, there's no way but up, and Orks never lose. So this is a constant win-win situation for us, and it feels very 40K relative, right? We're kind of LARPing in how we exist in actual 40K universe, where we take a lot of losses, but we're still ultimately winning, right? So we have a lot left to learn. Don't be disheartened on playing Orks. If you've been painting them and collecting them, keep doing it. Don't look at the stats and be disheartened. Don't look at what you're hearing about people losing and having a hard time. Well, all it means when you're looking at the top level play of events is if you go to a GT, you're likely to take a loss. Maybe two if you're going too skewed or get unlucky with matchups. That's just the state of the game sometimes, and overall it's a very healthy state of the game, as we can also catch some people off guard, like that one Blood Angel player who thought he was going to go undefeated, and then he ran into us and we crumped him, right? So take satisfaction in just the experience. Maybe you're just having a very thematic list and you end up getting more wins than you expected. Maybe you just run over and destroyed the other melee armies that tried to beat you, and then you got shot off the table by Tau. Who cares? At least you won the Krump fight, right? Don't let them cowards shoot you off the table and that dishearten you. Find ways to still enjoy our faction, because all that happened now is the meta chasers left. People kind of disrespect Orks for the most part. A lot of different other content creators and communities, when they look at Orks, they're like, oh, you got Warhorde, just be happy. You guys deserve the nerf. You're too strong. You're broken. Which means they're just, now we have time to shine and catch them all off guard. And don't take that as heart. We're paying for our sins, as someone said earlier. My boy Jay Hune, I believe, said we're paying for our sins of 9th edition. In some cases, we are. If you're new, sorry to hear that, but we have a lot left to play. So let's make sure that we kind of come more united, get a nice consensus of some changes we want to see, maybe some over exaggerations of changes that we took. Maybe GW will catch the attention of, maybe we'll catch the attention of GW and get a nice revamping in a way that doesn't make us the most toxic army in the game, but also allows us to play the game in our favorite detachments without feeling like we're completely underpowered, talking about Call of Speed, or playing Da Hunt where just one cunning player goes, oh, if I put my Rhino in the back or my Warlord, you're just never going to get army rule. Okay, then I'll just do that, right? That's not saying you can't play them. That's just to say they could usually use a little bit of rework and become a little bit more interesting, right? And our players would be totally fine with that. So with that being said, there's a lot more to come. ATC has a lot of fun orc lists. So on Friday, I'm thinking I'm going to look at a bunch of the ATC lists because there is a Cult of Speed player in there, some Dread Mob players in there. Let's see what these thick-headed players are thinking of when they're going into this. Of course, I do expect to see a lot of skews because that's kind of what teams are about, but it could also get us some food for thought. After that, it's all about the tactics, baby, because we got to see where we end up in the Great WAAAGH. But there's always one thing to keep in mind is don't cross our wall because we'll not get teeth out.